Assembly Member Qureshi.
Thank you, Chair. Mr Davies, sticking with the here and now with the compensation and mitigation on airport noise, I just want to be reassured that in coming to a decision regarding aviation expansion, what weight will you give to the present offer that Heathrow Holdings have made regarding the £500 million for noise insulation and property compensation?
All three proposers have made proposals on property compensation and noise. In fact, I think it's fair to say that on a per-person basis, Gatwick's is rather larger than Heathrow, but that's partly because, of course, there are fewer people around Gatwick, so it's almost bound to be that way. But I think this is an area which we'll be looking to get public responses from, particularly from the GLA and the councils, the local councils involved, because it's very clear to us that the type of compensation needs to be thought about very carefully. From our full-day visit yesterday to Hounslow, it's pretty clear that there it's the schools issue that looms particularly large. They are much more concerned about creating a good learning climate for children in the borough, and have got some quite imaginative ideas about the ways in which schools can be retrofitted to make them, operable within even rather close to a runway. And we've actually, we went to see classrooms that had not been retrofitted with the right kind of glazing plus air conditioning, and classrooms that had been, and there's big impacts you can make there. So I'm concerned as we go forward to try to get a bit more fine-grained on what kind of compensation and mitigation you need, not just a sort of, well, it'll be, 500 quid a house for people to, do double glazing. So that, when you talk to local communities, obviously no one will turn down £500 straight for their double glazing, but what they're most concerned about is these particular things, like the particularly affected schools, and they seem to argue that spending really decent money there is actually more effective than just spraying some not particularly well targeted compensation over a larger area. So that's the territory that we want to explore in the consultation.
Okay, well, can I make 3 points to your answer? I mean, essentially, most of the mitigation that has been offered with this £500 million should be in place anyway with a two-runway airport as we've got at Heathrow. Heathrow's current schemes are actually the least generous in the United Kingdom, if not the whole of the industrialised world. And I think what you've just said about Gatwick confirms that. And finally, there has been a lot of foot dragging over the years by BAA and Heathrow Holdings on that front. For example, the schools fund that you mentioned it's taken a long time to get there for that 25 million, for that community buildings noise insulation scheme, and the residential scheme is particularly difficult for people to actually apply and get what they feel they need, let alone the ventilation side of the issues locally. I just want to, as a result, ask, do you think the noise insulation compensation is sufficient to meet in the concerns of Londoners that you must have met yesterday in Hounslow?
Well, I'm keen not to sort of go backwards. I mean, I hear what you say, and everybody else says that to me, that in the past relationships have not been great and that promises have been made that have not been fulfilled, and I hear all that, but I'm obviously trying to focus on creating a better climate in the future. And I think it is fair to say that Heathrow have been more forthcoming this time round than they ever have been in the past. As to whether that is adequate, I'm not sure I can judge that yet, because we haven't yet had the community responses to what Heathrow proposed. So what I'm really looking for in this area is for community groups and councils really to look carefully at what has been proposed, and I'm sure they'll ask for more. Well, that's fine. I mean, we're in a debate here about what an acceptable way forward for expanding Heathrow or Gatwick might be. And so I think that's the territory of the debate over the next few months, And of course you may get to a point where Heathrow say, well, if that's the price of doing it, we don't want to do it. And when that, we need to test that, don't we? So I'm looking for for detailed responses on this, but I don't want to say at this point. In fact, I think it would be rather a mistake for me to say at this point, oh, that's acceptable, where, because I think the Heathrow would then say, oh, it's job done. In that case, there's no further debate. So I don't wish the Commission to get into that point. I think by the end of the process, we would say, well, does this appear to us to be something which could be the basis of an acceptable balance between the economic imperative of expansion and the compensation of the local community? I think that's where we want to get to at the end, and we will have to take a view. But I don't want to take that view now.
The important thing to appreciate is that Heathrow are only offering what should have been in place now that now that they're pushing for the third runway, and I think that needs to be taken on board, and you've clearly done that from yesterday. Can I just move to night flights, because it's quite interesting how you responded to my colleague John, and particularly your interim report, where you've got a section on early morning smoothing, and you recommend that Heathrow be allowed to increase the number of flights between 5 a.m. and 6 a.m. And it's funny, we do regularly get residents from South London, SW2 was the last one, and from Brixton complaining about a 5:45 flight. Why would you be recommending more misery for Londoners? 'Cause this is the particular thing, bugbear that Londoners have, night flights in the morning. It just seems very strange. You're arguing for the noise ombudsman. At the same time, you seem to be given leeway for night flights in the early morning to be increased in your interim report.
What happens at the moment is that there is a finite number of flights allowed under the night flights regime. And what happens is that they all rush to get into the holding pattern in order to get these slots. And you then have a gap in the schedule about between, is it 6 and 6:20, where the gap
I think it's 22:06.
22:06 and 6 o'clock, right. Because you've got all those in, but you then have a lot of flights that arrive shortly after 6 in order to get in, because they've been prevented from getting in before 6 because of the 16 flight limitation. And at that point, what happens very frequently is that in order to get these flights in, they operate what's called team, which effectively is that you're using both runways for landing. That means that people under the south runway who had expected not to have any landings on that day, and as you know, these things are rotated to give people respite, they find that they do get landings, early morning landings, at that time, because this bunching effect occurs. So our proposal was to say, well, you could smooth this by actually using this 5:40 to 6, which technically does, I agree, increase the number of, quote, night flights as defined by being before 6 o'clock, but which means that you would not have to do double landings on the other runway, and therefore the respite would be more certain. People would know that on that day they wouldn't get overflown in the morning. When we talked to residents' groups, clearly there are differences of view, but you get very strong view that respite is very important, to the certainty of knowing when you're going to be overflown and when you're not. And so this rather technical change was, in our minds, designed to improve the reliability of respite, not to increase the overall number of flights. This is all within the existing cap, but it also has positive consequences later on in the day, actually, in terms of managing flights, and probably will reduce the number of late arrivals, in the late evening as well. So it was a fairly technical point, and we suggested that there should be a consultation on it. And if the balance of the consultation was that no, people would rather have this gap and rather suffer the fact that on a number of days there were dual landings, well, that's their choice. But actually, a lot of people argued to us that respite was very important.
Well, just on the consultation front, there was a useful consultation by the Department of Transport just before Justin Greening and Teresa Villiers were moved from the department, and what we put in from the Environment Committee said quite clearly, Londoners deserve a good night's kib, and I don't think that's going to change if we go back and make a submission again on that front. I just want to be reassured you haven't left the door open for the possibility that when you do turn down Heathrow's expansion, that this happens in the meantime. Can I just move on to a final point? I mean, there's actually a lot that could have been done from here, I would suggest. The Mayor does have statutory responsibilities for ambient noise. I just wondered whether you've got a view on that, given your extensive discourse on noise ombudsman issues nationally. Could the Mayor have done a lot more on this front rather than spending his time in jurisdictions that he doesn't have any front in the Thames estuary?
Sorry, I'm not quite sure what the specific question is.
The question is essentially the Mayor does have responsibilities on this front. Could the Mayor have done more on this front?
I think the Mayor has been very active in representing his view to us about Heathrow and noise, so I wouldn't wish to criticise him for not making his points. I think he's quite good at making his points. But
okay,